sit down, really. This is going to take a couple minutes. This is not just an introduction. Well, it is, but it's not going to take 30 seconds. So everyone come on in, sit down. Get yourself comfortable. Take a seat. Okay. So, thank you for all coming. This is the third of what we're doing in a series of walks on Broadway called Broadway on My Mind. Broadway is a really interesting street. When I read that the financing had been approved in former Mayor Villa Ragos's final days for Strategy 1, Phase 1 of the Broadway Streetscape Master Plan, I decided that I'd really been thinking about giving a Broadway, well, I've given a Broadway tour, but it really was time. I wanted to get people on Broadway and looking, because there are a lot of things on Broadway that are very fragile, like the terrazzo sidewalks. Is Mr. Rory here? He's left. Oh, wow. Okay. Broadway is a really interesting street that was really created, came into its own right before World War I, 1914. Beautiful Beaux-Arts corridor. It's on the National Register. A lot is changing. A lot is changing with private property owners. A lot is changing with the city. The city, for instance, not the city, Metro, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which is the county and the city, has actually, when we gave the first tour in July, we found out that 70% of bus traffic has been moved off of Broadway and pushed over to Spring and Hill, which is interesting because the city's thinking about how to bring in the streetcar. So a lot of things at the public level, in terms of public roads, is going to change, and a lot of things with private ownership is changing, and I just want to document it, and I want to get people down looking at it, because Broadway is really, really interesting, and I care about it a lot, and I'm really glad everyone's here. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk for about 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to start to walk. We're going to walk south, we're going to stop at 8th, we're going to talk about Hamburger's department store, and then we're going to keep walking, and we're going to stop at 9th, and we're going to talk about the former Blackstone department store, former Metropolitan Post Office, the United Artists Building, which is going to become Esotouric. So, Ed Rosenthal, this is Donald Spivack. So Donald, come on up. Maybe you'll talk I'd love for you, we have another tour guide, Ed Rosenthal, he's getting a sandwich. Ed is going to recite his, come on over, you're going to stand away from the amplifier. That's right, watch that, okay. Ed will be up in a minute. Ed is going to recite some of his poetry in the course of this walk and give some insight to Broadway as a commercial broker. But first, let me introduce Donald Spivack. Donald, you were Deputy Chief of Operations and Policy for the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles. You know what you're talking about. I would love for you you do, come on. I'm so glad you're here, thank you. You had a good trip to New York?
Yes, thank you.
Good, okay. Donald, we're on Broadway, we're walking south. We've talked about this in the podcast recently. Give us a snapshot, and we're going to stop at Hamburger's, which you correctly pointed out is the most important piece of property left in terms of development.
In terms of
development, right. So maybe using that as a hook, just give us a snapshot of what Broadway looks like right now. And a lot of this tour we're going to be looking back, so I'm really looking to you to give us the now and the next step.
Thank you. Today it looks a little shabby, and that's because of a lot of history and a lot of construction that's going on. But Broadway emerged as the primary commercial corridor for Los Angeles in the era around and after the First World War, and was largely the place of most commercial activity and theatrical activity. It had the greatest concentration of theaters in Los Angeles in that era. And it went into a period of decline as the rest of Los Angeles downtown went into decline, along with much of the central city in the post-World War II era, as people began to move to the suburbs and businesses began to follow. The area along the southern portion of Broadway was a large portion of the commercial district, and it was anchored by what was originally Hamburger's department store, one of several department stores that were along Broadway. That particular structure was almost 1 million square feet of space. And when it was vacated as a department store, it was at the same time as the majority of the major department stores in downtown Los Angeles were moving out of the city. And at the time, CRA was involved in developing a new commercial project at 7th and Figueroa Streets, and Mayor Bradley came to CRA and said, you've got to keep department stores down here. And so as a result, the 7th Fig project was designed around that office complex, and at that time, Brooks and May Company moved from their locations on Broadway over to the 7th and Figueroa portion of Broadway, where previously the Broadway department store had already gone to 7th and Flower Streets. So that left vacant the buildings along Broadway that had previously been department stores. The Broadway building at 4th Street ultimately became a state office building. That is a very interesting story in its own right. The building at 7th Street, which was Wilkes, became the centerpiece of the St. Vincent Jewelry Center, which was the second largest development after the International Jewelry Center at 6th and 5th Streets. And the third building, interim, became essentially a ground floor swap meet with a series of manufacturing facilities on the upper level because of its proximity to other parts of the fashion district. So what was formerly the Hamburger department store has simply emerged in a long-term interim use as primarily a factory space with ground floor swap meet. The buildings around it have, in the last couple of years, been going through a great deal of conversion and renovation, primarily into retail buildings, and some of the theaters are beginning to come back in that area. The United Artists Theater came back as a church. It is now becoming the Ace Hotel, which will be an important anchor that will link the emerging design and merchandising element of the fashion district with the rest of downtown. The former Eastern Columbia department store has become a condo. The former Blackstone has become a rental residential building. The Orpheum Theater across the street has been renovated. The building above the Orpheum has become rental. The developer of that building is now doing additional rental space elsewhere on that particular block. So there is now a growing anchor of residential development that is moving into the upper floors of buildings on Lower Spring Street, Lower Broadway, and becoming a very important link between the commercial district that is moving back east along 7th Street and the fashion neighborhood that is growing again, with manufacturing primarily moving south and east, and design, merchandising, and distribution moving closer to the north and west, and coming back to Broadway, which is why the Ace Project Hotel is a very important factor in the reemergence of the fashion district. That's kind of where things are and where they've been going the last couple of years. As Richard mentioned, this former department store building with 1 million square feet of space is the largest single piece of real estate that hasn't seen any action. And it is ripe for some type of significant rehabilitation, conversion into probably some mixture of uses that could really tie together the commercial activity, residential activity that is occurring further north, and the emerging fashion and fashion distribution activity that is continuing to strengthen to the west, with links to the South Park neighborhood further to the west, and to the emerging industrial districts that are to the east.
That's fantastic. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you. As I swap out my phone battery so I can engage in social media on this tour.
I did that yesterday.
Yeah. You did in Cornell. You were in Cornell University yesterday? Good. Okay. Perfect. Where's Ed?
Graduating, right there.
Ed, come on up. Okay, so we're going to leave soon and we're going to start to walk, but before we do, I have to introduce another tour guide. This is Ed Rosenthal. As you can see, Donald and Ed go back. Ed, you're going to read us some poems throughout this tour. I was hoping you could read a poem now, but I was hoping maybe you could give us just 1 minute of background on who you are, because not only are you a poet, but you're a corporate real estate, commercial real estate broker. And this just go.
Thanks for coming. You may have heard of me. I'm kind of a local fixture, poet broker, and I wrote poems about real estate that I would use in deals, and emails, comments to clients, and some of these were published in the Los Angeles Times and the Wall Street Journal. You know, it's not a widely explored genre to have real estate about commercial real estate, but on this tour, one of my favorite poems is about Eastern Columbia building. I'll be able to recite that right there. right next to the building, and I was involved in that property. And recently I don't know how much information to give you at one time. That's pretty heavy already.
People like Clifton's. People want to hear about Clifton's.
I was the broker in the torturous deal to sell Clifton's, which went on and on. And nobody was really interested except one person, and he ended up buying it, Andrew Myron. And like all these deals, you had to go through hell first, and then it was finished. Then after that deal was done, right after, I went out on the desert to celebrate. And I got lost in the Mojave Desert. You probably read about me in the Times for like a week. I should be dead, but it just didn't happen. And I'm so grateful. And so I just want to share with you, if you're a real estate poet and you almost die, when you come back to the real estate, it's like, oh my God, are these fucking clients still doing the same stuff? And don't they understand? And what the hell is this? And then it takes years to accept that not everybody went through what you went through. And Don and I have been at this forever. He's certainly a left brain type, and I'm not. I'm the right brain type. I like quick summaries and very emotional, and he's been detailing everything going on downtown for decades.
82 is when you came on the scene, 1982? Yeah.
And so let me just share one of my real estate poems before we get started.
Perfect.
This was about the important developer Tom Gilmore. How many of you know who Tom Gilmore is? Wow, okay, not everybody. He was a leading proponent for adaptive reuse downtown, and I was in an escrow with him, and like most of these developers, they don't really have the money when the deadline comes up. So I wrote this poem. I'm sorry to say, Gilmore can't pay for the extension requested today, but if you take my advice, you'll stay by his side as he shifts to downtown overdrive. My friends, I hold the dearest clue. You've got something to lose, but he's got something that moves him. When most look up Maine, they only feel pain, but that's not our Tommy song. When they look down forth, they feel distraught, but he has loftier thoughts. So my dearest clients, don't greet him in silence. It's a natural alliance. It's timely, not a waste. While the market's disgrace has placed you in fidgeting digits. Okay, so that's what you've been explaining to me.
Perfect. Thank you. I didn't realize you were going to read that poem, which is a great poem, just because Donald is here. And this is a poem about a deal which basically, just for argument's sake to keep it short, basically Tom Gilmore and Associates took over the block between 4th and 5th Spring to Main, basically. Donald Spivack's office was across the street. You wrote the check, for this year I wrote a check to clear the tax lien of several $100,000 on the Braley building, which is the John Parkinson structure at 4th and Spring. Take it away, just give us some background to this poem Ed just read.
The project that Tom Gilmore was putting together was to convert several buildings, mostly fronting on 4th Street, into the first live work under the new adaptive reuse ordinance in Los Angeles. You could watch the building from our office across the street. Important to that project was the building that was right at the corner of 4th and Spring Street, which had been taken over by the county for failure to pay taxes. So Siri stepped in, got the building back from the county, took title to the building, paid off the taxes, in effect paid the county for the share of the taxes that would go to the county, the city, and the school district, and absorbed the portion that otherwise would have come to the redevelopment agency, because we all shared in the taxes from the properties, but got the building back, and that saved the project being put together. Tom then went to the federal government under a program that was then in existence to foster revitalization in urban centers, and asked the federal government for a substantial contribution to the cost of the project.
Name of the
It was the Urban Revitalization Program, Federal Urban Revitalization Program, that no longer exists. And the feds came down to the city and said, okay, we're looking at this very seriously. City, what have you done? And we stood up and said, well, we took the first building, got it under control at a cost of several hundred thousands of dollars, so we are deeply committed to this project going forward. And on that basis, the federal government underwrote $30 million cost for a good portion of the project. And so it happened.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, good. I think we're ready to start walking. Ed, before we get started, we're going to go downstairs and wait. But Ed, do we want to agree that we'll stop in front of Clifton's and at least just talk about Clifton's for a second? You don't have to talk, but I will. I'm going to talk about Clifton's for a second. Great. Okay. So we're going to meet everyone downstairs. I'm going to take the elevator because I have so much stuff, and we'll just meet right outside and we'll start walking south. Great.
Hashtag.
Right. Hashtag Broadway on my mind. If you're taking photos and posting them to social media on this walking tour, hashtag is Broadway on my mind. No punctuation.
Thank you.
Okay.
A little on the faded tip, but lovely. Commission property.
I'm a follower of this particular school.
And also, economic return for right. So a lot of those you're going to do take the jewelry store. You mean crazy man walking with age.
Okay. Everyone here? Okay, good. Where's Ed? Perfect. Okay, I don't know where Ed is, but that's okay. He's getting his sandwich. Right. Okay. There they are. There's Donald. There. Ed's coming. Okay. Ed's gonna figure it out. He always does. Okay. Directly in back of me is Clifton's Cafeteria. Clifton's Cafeteria had its. So this is the deal that Ed talked about, where he got lost in the Mojave. Clifton's has been closed for 2 years now, 24 months. Andrew Myron purchased Clifton's from the Clinton family. Clinton family took over the cafeteria in 1935 from the Bose brothers. The Bose brothers had a lease on the cafeteria. The building immediately to the north of it, with the two ficus trees in front of it, that's the Carr building. The Carr building is 1924. Most of these buildings we see in this stretch, these all date from right before World War I. This great building boom that seized Los Angeles, and that period is called Beaux-Arts, this classical period. So Clifton's and the Carr building right next to it are both Beaux-Arts buildings. Mr. Carr, who owned both buildings, really liked Clifford Clinton. The Bose brothers had told him they didn't want to renew their lease in 35, and Mr. Carr approached Clifford Clinton, who had a cafeteria at 4th and Hill and a penny soup kitchen in the basement of his cafeteria at 4th and Hill, kitty corner from Angel's White, and said, "You're one of the good guys. I want good guys as tenants. Do you want a lease on another cafeteria?" And Clifford Clinton said, "I do." And they opened in 35, and 2 years ago they sold to Andrew Myron, and Andrew has been remodeling for 2 years, and we hope he will reopen. Okay, that's a big breath. The building in back of you is now a parking lot. Okay, the ground floor is jewelry, but if you look up, the upper floors are a parking lot. This is the Hollenbeck building. The Hollenbecks built this. This is 1912. Again, that classic Beaux-Arts period. Just to get everyone oriented. Oh, yeah. Directly in back of me, this is the Haas building. It's been remodeled in the 70s. It's really ugly. The parking lot, kitty corner to us, where it says Carl's Jr. and Kentucky Fried Chicken, that was the... Thank you. That was the Lancashire Hotel, 1905. It was modeled, it had a very similar design to the St. Francis in San Francisco. 700 rooms. It's a no, 500 rooms. 700 rooms is post-20s. 500-room hotel, one of the largest hotels. It survived through 1986, 87. They tore it down and put up a parking lot. Very, very sad. Directly across the street from us, this beautiful sandstone building. This is Lowe's State Theater. This is 1925 Weeks and Days. They're a San Francisco architecture firm. Gorgeous. This is the busiest intersection in Los Angeles pre-war. This is the original terminus of Route 66. I believe Lowe's State had 4 entrances in its heyday, the movie theater. So, just really, really super important. Okay, we're standing still. Does everyone see the blade sign for the Yorkshire Apartments across the street? John Parkinson, 1904. It's an operating SRO, single room occupancy, and it really is an SRO. You don't need a 6-month lease to move in. You can give them, they'll take a month rent down, and you can move in. What's interesting about the Yorkshire, besides the fact that it's an operating SRO, which are very few and far between in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, Buster Keaton's father died there. So, next month, this is a teaser, next month, we're just going to talk about bullocks at this corner. The tour for next month is we're going to start with the Hollenbeck building and work our way around the block over to Hill and talk about how Mr. Letts purchased all these buildings and created the Bullocks empire. That's next month. But in the course of Mr. Bullocks creating his empire, in 1933 he hired John Parkinson to build the 8-story addition to Bullocks, just the other side at 630 South Hill, so just the next street over, and they had to tear down the Hotel Continental. The Hotel Continental was where all the vaudevillians lived. And Buster Keaton's father had spent so much time there as a working vaudevillian that he decided that's where he was going to die. And Buster Keaton had to come down and drag his father, kicking and screaming, along with 6 of his friends, and put them in the Yorkshire Apartments. And that's where they died. And they were very sad to leave the Continental. So remember the Continental. Is Ed here yet? No.
No.
Okay, we're going to keep moving.
He was getting his sandwich 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
He's on a plate.
I don't know. I hope they reopen. All right, we're gonna keep moving.
Don't you mean you hope they reopen soon?
I hope they reopen soon.
It will reopen.
It will reopen. They're gonna reopen soon. Okay, you can't say that on mic. Okay, let's keep moving south. Nathan, I want you to lead the way. We're gonna walk. Let's stop at the pedestrian crosswalk halfway down the block. Okay?
Perfect. You know about it.
Yeah,
tell him about CRA 1.
No. I mean, he knows.
Broadway. He's right there.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's him. There he is. He's fine. He doesn't want to talk about Clifton.
Very smart.
Yes, it is. And what do you see?
And something like an Urban Outfitters.
It's all right there. Stop.
And it will start to attract maybe better stores downtown. So I've always
Okay, we did it. Okay.
right kind of street, like a long
Okay. Just point out a couple things. The arcade building across the street with the glazed yellow brick, that's the original Barker Brothers showroom. That's 1904 Robert B. Young. Nathan, perhaps you'd like to say something about Robert B. Young, who has a lot of buildings on Broadway.
Why, yes, I would. Well, Robert Brown Young, prolific East Coast, then San Francisco, then here. Basically, Robert Brown Young built all of the great, iconic, now vanished, Victorian-looking San Francisco-style bay-windowed hotels. The great Hollenbeck, which was at 2nd and Main. The great Westminster, everyone always sees photos of the great bay-windowed one, which was at 4th. The aforementioned Lankershim Hotel, which is there where the Pioneer Chicken is, or
Robert B. Young.
that was a Robert Brown Young. And much in the way that Parkinson is so unbelievably important for all of his major monuments, he's also important because there are so many of them extant. Where Robert Brown Young, who designed and had erected in his lifetime twice as many as Parkinson, virtually nothing of his exists because he was working mostly between 1880. He stopped working by 1910, and at that point, the great building booms to which Richard referred to pre-World War I, and of course the great interbellum building booms, just wiped it out in favor of Stiles Clements and Parkinson and Dodd and Richards, my personal heroes. So Young will have his due, because I believe there's a blog coming up on Robert Brown Young.
Perfect.
Perfect, Nathan, perfect. Okay. to get us oriented, if you turn around and look straight up, we're in front of the Isaacs building. This is 1912, Edelman and Barnett. The Isaacs brothers owned a department store called The Unique, and they were visionaries. They ran department stores before World War II. These are the guys that invented the notion of going to Europe for 3-4 months a year, 2-3 times a year, and buying women's fashion and bringing it back to Los Angeles. So you think James Oviatt did that. James Oviatt did do that. James Oviatt ran a men's store. Men's fashion doesn't really change. The Isaacs brothers were visionaries because they actually would go spend an incredible amount of capital, sink it in clothes in Paris that no one had seen, come back to Los Angeles, sell them, make a profit. They're visionaries. Okay, we'll stop talking about that. Okay, right, where are we going? Okay, corner building, that's the Chapman building, that's 1908, and that's Ernst McDonald. That's a wonderful building. I'm really embarrassed. I was speaking so fast. I told you that the Lowe's State Theater, the theater we saw back at the corner, it's not sandstone, of course, it's terracotta, and we're going to talk about terracotta extensively. Gladys McBean did the formwork for that. When we get down to the United Artists and the Broadway Leasehold building, we will talk about brick and terracotta and LA press brick, Los Angeles terracotta before and after Gladys McBean. We'll get to that. Very quickly. Oh, yeah, okay. We can't see it now, and it's too sunny on the side of the street. But everyone look to their left. See the scaffolding and the screen over that building? Yeah. That building was built in 1912. It was built for an apartment store called the Palais de Monde, and it has gold leaf trim. There's a giant window in it, and there's gold leaf trim extant. So on your way back, look across the street of this building, and you'll see a giant border of gold leaf trim around a 2-story window. It's absolutely gorgeous. So that'll just give you a sense of what was being built here before World War I. Ed, do you have anything to say? Perfect. Come and face the people.
In the current business environment in this block, it's not quite caught up to what's going on in the next block, and it has to do with some of the issues involving the ownership. You're mostly interested in history.
No, today
The
is an
evolving
interesting
situation is this building here. Well, it's really one building, but it's split between 2 owners. And unless you can get agreement between them, you can't develop the buildings at all, and that's exactly what's holding up development of this building. For example, my clients, they own the Chapman building. They tried to make condos. What happened was, during the financial environment that we're all still in, it turned out the mortgages were all with whatever their name is. It's not good. I forgot, but all of the mortgages went down. So Countrywide, and everyone else had to cancel their escrow. So they just turned it into an apartment building.
I live there.
Okay, you live there in an apartment.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it could be beneficial.
No condos at all.
There's none, right? Because they couldn't do it. There weren't enough in the building. When it came to close escrow on the large purchase, all the 90% of the loans were with Countrywide, and they were with fake down payments and so on. That's just a little bit about the impact of the financial crisis. The other thing I want to make you aware of, which is why, people like Richard are so important, and Don, a lot of the upstairs of these buildings have been destroyed by careless improvement. For example, that arcade building, it's disgusting upstairs. You don't even want to go there. They just put in huge A-frames across every floor and only open the downstairs as an arcade. So that's why vigilance is needed on the part of these preservation movements.
And thank you so much. Don, before we get to our next stop is Hamburgers, do you just want to say something about the trend for property owners to close up the top floors and just really get why the ground floors are open and the top floors are vacant as a trend?
The primary reason was that for a long time, retail real estate on Broadway was very, very valuable. It competed with Beverly Hills in terms of the rates that landlords could get. And there was very little demand for the upper floors of the buildings because they were inefficient to continue to use in commercial purposes, and the residential demand hadn't yet started. And so in many cases, the owners found that it made more sense to simply close off where an entrant was and create an additional retail space that they could rent, rather than continue to have access to the upper floors. Plus, they didn't have to go through any of the costs of renovation in the upper floors, installing fire sprinklers or anything else to bring them up to code as long as they remain vacant.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. I want to keep moving. One last thing I want to mention. The arcade building, which is the original Barker Brothers, Godfrey's Cafeteria took up the ground floor, the basement, and the mezzanine. And that opened in 1915, and that made it through World War, that was there through the 30s. Clifton's Cafeteria, 34. Figaro, where we started Shaber's Cafeteria, 1928, in the Spring Arcade, the Mercantile Arcade building, half a block up from Figaro, was the cafeteria. Do you remember the name of the cafeteria? I don't remember the name offhand, but the Spring Arcade building, which is the beautiful Gladys McBean archway, that of course had a giant cafeteria in the basement.
They used to
Ross,
call it Sunny Cafeteria, not California.
Just the other side of the scaffolding is the Ross Dress for Less. That was originally was the Crest quarter, the Crest 25-cent store, and that had the largest lunch counter in the West Coast when it opened in 1917, I think it was. Yeah, it was a 5 and right. It was a right. But when Crest opened, they had the largest lunch counter in the basement. So just the notion of getting a meal for 10 cents on Broadway was just, this was what you did. And this is, yes, this is,
And one of the Clifton's cafeterias, the one on 7th Street that's now $7 grand, in the basement there was also a little cafeteria.
yeah. So cafeterias, have we passed any, Nathan, it's your job to point out terracotta on our way down. Mr. Rory, do you want to say anything about terracotta? You don't have to. Okay, everyone's worried about the terrazzo, not terracotta, terrazzo. When we keep walking, we're going to go through some terrazzo sidewalks, worry about the terrazzo. The sidewalks are shared. The city owns the far side of the sidewalk, and the property owners own the inside track. And so the notion of landmarking a terrazzo sidewalk is really complicated. And I've been talking to Ken Bernstein for a year, and some days when he's in a good mood, he says, maybe I think you could probably write an application for that. And then other days I write him back and he says, yeah, but I think you can't do it. So the terrazzo is really interesting and important, and I'm really concerned when the city starts doing phase 1, strategy 1 of this streetscape master plan work that the terrazzo is in danger. So everyone take pictures of the terrazzo and tweet it and blog it, and let's keep moving. Nathan, you're in charge. We're going to get us to Hamburgers. I'm going to be standing in front of Hamburgers. And everyone think of Moishe Hamburger and his long walk from the Los Angeles Athletic Club at 7th and Olive.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Clifton's before here. Okay. Because I ducked into the theater to do I've never been in that theater before. And they
Absolutely gorgeous. It's gorgeous structure.
Yeah, those guys are
They're all doing this.
they're pretty interesting. They're snake handlers, I believe.
Yeah. Are they snake handlers?
I've heard something about that.
Really? I didn't see that, but they look very culty.
Probably most of it is. Richard will know them. Maybe that's 6.
Let's go.
Urban Outfitters coming soon.
I'm gonna stand here. Perfect. Okay. Where's Don?
It is so impossible.
There he is. Okay. Let's get us oriented. I've lost my notes. That's okay. I have the important notes.
I have the copy for you.
Okay, good. Hold on to it. Don't take it out, because I'll just lose it again. I'll need it later. I don't need them now. Okay, I want to get us oriented. I am standing, my back is to the original, well, not the original, but the 1906 Hamburger's department store. It started as the People's Store. In the 1890s, they had a store a little further up on Spring. 1906, they hired Alfred Rosenheim, who would become the Cultural Arts Commissioner of Los Angeles and would later get into hot water for taking bribes for approving projects, because every building had to go through the Cultural Arts Commission. Anyway, Rosenheim designed this building. It's over 1 million square feet. I want Don to talk about it in a second. It's really important in terms of what is happening on Broadway now, but let me quickly bring everyone up to speed on some buildings we're looking at. Okay, behind me, in front of me, behind you, is the Wurlitzer building. This very tall building with the terracotta, with the glazed terracotta, with the green and pink, and the volutes and the pillars. Okay, that's the Wurlitzer building. That's Walker and Eisen. That's 1924. The Platt building is 2 buildings to the south of that, and the Platt building is 1928. These are both built for music stores. It should be noted, as we think about all this unused space on Broadway, that in both of these buildings on the upper floors were concert halls, as in Carnegie Hall quality concert halls, holding 500 people, where they would do performances, because they're music stores and they wanted to show off their instruments. So we have a friend who's in the Platt building, and she says there's no evidence that an auditorium exists anymore. She's seen absolutely no evidence. So it's really interesting. Broadway Bar in the Platt building, which is 2 buildings down. Does everyone see the Broadway Bar sign? That's, we'll talk about that a little later, right? Directly in front of us is the Rialto. This is a movie theater that opened in 1917 and it closed in as a movie theater closed in 1988. Michelle, was it built as a movie theater? Was it? Yes, it was built as a movie theater. Thank you. Urban Outfitters is moving in. Dawn, I'll let you pick up that thread. Not specifically, but just hold on, yeah. At the corner is the Tower Theater. This is S. Charles Lee. It's 1927, which is relatively late for a movie theater on Broadway. It's really sort of, everything, by 32, they're not building any more theaters. So it's S. Charles Lee, the Tower Theater, Charleston Heston in the film,
Omega Man.
Omega Man watches the Woodstock film in here. The Tower Theater is a really interesting space. It's very narrow, and it ended its life as a newsreel theater. It just showed newsreels at the end of its life. And I will look up its closer date while Dawn's talking, but I don't remember the closing date off the top of my head. But by the Omega Man is 77, so I think it was towards the end of its life by then. Okay, we're standing in front of, I forgot, I'm going to look it up in a second. I know, I'm going to look, I forgot this building's name. I have to look up my notes. I can't remember everything off the top of my head. Donald, where are you? You're right here. Okay, I want everyone to turn their attention to Donald. As he said upstairs at Figaro, this is 1 million square feet of retail space behind us. Donald, take it away. This is the last great standout.
Okay, again, this is 1 million square feet of space. It was developed in several stages as a very large department store. And among other things, as merchandise changed over the course of years, the need for the amount of space in department stores went down. Coupled with people moving out of the central cities and moving to the suburbs, and the stores following them to the suburbs, so centrally located stores became more and more of a problem for operations. As I said, one of the biggest reasons that department store buildings in central cities became obsolete is simply what they sold in there got smaller. When televisions first came out, they were table size, bureau size. Now they're the size of a slightly larger, what used to be a cell phone, before cell phones got as small as they were. The first portable phones were about the size of a third of that tripod standing there. So merchandise has gotten smaller. Women used to wear bustles that would be a yard across. And now dresses don't take up near that amount of space. If anybody still wears dresses on a regular basis, people just wear jeans, and jeans take up very little space at all. So one of the things that caused a lot of difficulty for department stores to continue to operate in their previous mode was simply the products became so much smaller, and they're continuing to do so. That then, in current days, is being exacerbated by mail and computer sales of material, so you no longer need to have the stores. What you need now are warehouses in places that have good access to trucks for distribution purposes. A whole other story on that we'll deal with another time. But in an area that is now seeing really 2 things happening. One, this area has picked up the residential development that started up around 4th Street with the old bank district and has been moving first down Spring Street and now swinging back over to Broadway, primarily with the building above the Orpheum Theater, and the same owner as did the Orpheum Theater is now renovating the building that's directly across the street. That's why there's scaffolding in front of it. Interestingly enough, the first floor apart. Every floor was in a separate apartment. And the Chapman has come back as apartments as well. And on the side of the street, both the Eastern Columbia building and the Blackstone building are residential buildings. This is a tremendous resource in terms of the amount of space, but also a very difficult one because you have 1 million square feet in roughly 8 to 10 floors, which means tremendous amount of space on any given floor. The floors, because they were designed for the original merchandising of a department store, only have windows on the exteriors, so the entire interior of the block is solid space. And trying to find some use within that space without, say, going in and cutting into the building to create light wells or other ways of getting light into the building is very difficult. And then cutting into the building to create light wells runs into issues having to do with the historic nature of the structure itself, as well as some structural problems about the way the building is built. So finding a way of making use of this space is going to be very problematic, but it is the last remaining very large piece of real estate in this portion of downtown. As I say, the first thing that was beginning to happen is this large residential base of activity. The second is national chains returning to Broadway. And that's happening with Urban Outfitters, for example, directly across the street. And it's this end of Broadway that is getting the national chains coming back to do retail business on Broadway.
Don, thank you. Okay, so I want to...
Cassandra, born in the USA.
Tim, turn the camera on.
Hi.
Thank you. Okay.
Are you ready to continue?
Thank you. Okay. Dawn, thank you. That was a very good start. So, the Rialto Urban Outfitters is going to open at the Rialto. All right. This is the Ace Hotel. This is our last stop is the Ace Hotel. This is starting to become a real anchor. The building you were talking about, Donald, directly across the street where the scaffolding is, that the Needlemans are, that is the Southern California Music Company. That's 1914. And on the 8th floor was Chickering Hall, and you can go look at the ProQuest. They would have really serious concerts in Chickering Hall at about a 400-seat auditorium. Okay, I have no idea. I have calls out to Steve Needleman. I never hear back from him. But I don't know what happened to Chickering Hall. I don't know. It could have been destroyed decades ago. But this building, Southern California Music Building, had a really big performance space on the 8th floor. Don't know. Okay. Ed, do you have a poem or something you want to say? It's okay. We're going to do it at the United... Perfect. Eastern Columbia. Okay. Great. I want everyone to once again note that almost every surface you see on these buildings is either glazed brick or terracotta. If you look at the Wurlitzer building with the volutes and the arches and the panels, that's of course all terracotta. It's of course, on the upper floors we have the polychrome terracotta with all the different colors. And this is all, well, yes, the Wurlitzer building is Ladding McQueen. I will wait for a chronology of terracotta manufacturers till we get to the Broadway Leaseville building across from the artists, because that's a very good example. So, Nathan, all right, are you ready? Let's get us to the Eastern Columbia. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I'm so sorry. Take it away.
For these old music buildings, Sammy Kaye used to play these shows up there, and there's this song called Guilty. It reminded me of the love affair with Los Angeles that we all share, right? Though you've decided that we must part, and our love will not die, it seems as though I loved you so. You'll always be in my heart. Is it a sin? Is it a crime? Loving you, dear, like I do. If it's a crime, then I'm guilty. Guilty of loving you.
Flannery, thank you.
Sure.
Very shy.
Oh, no, it's not very shy. Yeah. No,
He's got a few of these.
he gets a slam. Yeah, no, it's not that.
Okay, everyone, that's in terms of, there's a ghost sign there, right behind the parking sign. That great ghost sign.
Oh, yeah.
Right next to the blade sign that says Blades. Actually, we see a bunch of great ghost signs as we look up history. Where's Ed? Ed? We are in front of the Eastern Columbia, which is Claude Bielman, 1931. Okay, at this point, give me a second. At this point, I'm going to start talking about terracotta. So, there was a real revolution in building materials in Los Angeles. Before World War I, you had LA pressed brick, and we're looking at an example of LA. We've seen examples of LA pressed brick terracotta. I'll show you some more. But around 1920, 21, 22, a company called Glady McBean comes into Los Angeles. It's a very large company. They take over the Tropico plant in Los Feliz. They build a plant in Lincoln. They built that a couple years earlier. And they start producing large-scale architectural terracotta. The Eastern Columbia building we're standing in front of is probably one of the best examples of architectural terracotta produced by Glady McBean. And directly across the street, another Claude Bielman structure, the 9th and Broadway building, 1930, zigzag moderne. This building is, of course, clad, if it's not copper, this beautiful patina copper, it's terracotta. And this is, again, all Glady McBean. Glady McBean was a giant, giant company, and really no one else could compete with them. They had the facilities to produce large architectural terracotta, and no one else could compete with them. And they were here at the right time, and they just really took everyone's business. And every building built in downtown in the 20s up through the 30s, they're still around today. If it's architectural terracotta, it's Glady McBean. And terracotta sidewalk. Right? Terrazzo. Terracotta's on my mind. Ed, just start talking. I'm going to have a sip of water.
So I'm sure Richard mentioned that in front of Clifton's is the largest terrazzo.
Yeah.
That's really important. Well, I want to just share with you that I was a listing broker on the sale of this building to Core. And I don't know why I'm compelled to tell you this, but just anecdotal information. This deal involved, it involved a large corporate entity, and it also involved these ancient landlords that, have been doing this kind of thing for thousands of years, and they always come out on top. But for those of you who don't like the multinationals, that's one group that comes out on top of them. These ancient landlords. But I was a listing broker here, and I loved the building, and it was in disgusting condition. And I wrote this poem at the time. It turned out to be a big deal for Core, the buyer, and they branded their entire business after this building. He's married to a well-known designer, Brad Korsen, Kelly Wurtzler, and they're in the middle of a divorce. Little local color. I'm going to get some help here on one stanza from
Sammy Kane is from Swayland.
Jaded Deco. In 29, the owners raised her fluted sides of aqua terracotta, covered her in deep blue and copper, made a tower like a tiara of lattice work in gold and giant white clocks below the neon name. Eastern Columbia. They pressed a gold sunburst into her front facade. It's not the best. The punctuation of the buses is not intended. They pressed a gold sunburst into her front facade to welcome wide-eyed shoppers. A beautiful goddess rising as a vision above Broadway, The owners took gold from their own pockets before the age of credit. Her clocks hummed through the Great Depression and the war. My father-in-law had a job selling furniture inside her in '36. Economist Jack Kaiser says back then the store was known for a catchy ad with the rising refrain, Broadway at 9. Broadway at 9. Wow. After the war, the suburbia craze hit. Developers moved on to mid-Wilshire, and she passed from the founders to the founders' family. In the 1980s, a developer borrowed millions to make her a fashion center again. Now the hands of her 4 clocks stay stuck. I'm the listing agent. Real estate guards, will I ever hang my sign on anything as beautiful? My goddess, Miss Eastern Columbia. Oh, thank you, and don't leave yet for my new forms, you know, post-survival forms.
Yep.
When we see the Ace Hotel.
That's right. So we're almost there. We got one more stop. Dawn, do you have anything? Do you maybe just a word or two about? You've seen this before. You've seen redevelopment on Broadway, and I'm wondering if now would be a good time for you just to quickly explain to people what Miracle on Broadway was, because it was a very important thing. I think right about when you came to the CRA and you started looking at Broadway. And to do this, we have to be exactly where we are. Since we can't be at 2 places at the same time, we're here. We're at 9th and Broadway, and when you talk about this, you're also going to be talking about 3rd and Broadway, and the Bradbury Building, and the $1 Million in Grand Central. So tell us about Miracle on Broadway.
Miracle on Broadway was the first business improvement district in Los Angeles. And it was a business-based business improvement district as opposed to the majority that are property owner-based. The idea was, and CRA had started it and brought in a number of people to try to put together an organization among the business people to start the restoration of activities on Broadway.
This was in the 80s.
This was in 86. 86 was the first year of Miracle on Broadway. And it was the first effort to begin to market Broadway to a broader audience than simply the audience that was shopping on Broadway, to take advantage of the fact that it was still a very vibrant shopping district, to begin to get people thinking about the restoration of the buildings, and particularly to bring the theaters back into operation, and to then link it to what was then a plan for major transportation improvement with the expected development of the subway system on the adjacent street on Hill Street, with a couple of stations that would serve the Broadway district. So it was an effort to begin looking at repositioning Broadway for revitalization, for redevelopment. With Miracle on Broadway, the first couple of phases were very superficial. There was some upgrade to the sidewalks, redoing the street lights and putting banners on the street, and then instituting the first of the private and business-funded trash collection programs, which was done in conjunction with the Central City East community, where we hired people who were graduates of people being homeless, trained them and put them to work in helping to collect trash and keep the streets clean. It was the first crew of folks, and it began to show noticeable differences in the appearance of Broadway, and people did at that time begin to take notice and to start to look at acquiring property for revitalization. The first couple of projects that took place were at the other end of Broadway with the renovation of the Bradbury Building, which itself was saved from demolition, having been slapped with a whole series of building violations because it didn't meet the current seismic and fire codes. And several $1 million later, the building was beautifully restored, which then triggered further investment in the acquisition of the Grand Central Market, the $1 Million Theater, the Metropolitan Water District building, the Lions building, and the rest of the complex that is now the Grand Central Square, and its conversion into one of the first residential complexes on Broadway. That experience really demonstrated the need to do something about the codes to make residential occupancy much easier. That complex was finished in 1993. It took a major investment from both the private sector and two public agencies, the MTA and the Redevelopment Agency, and that showed that we really needed to do something about the code. Ultimately, the adaptive reuse ordinance was adopted, made it possible to much more easily convert several of the buildings by eliminating setback requirements and on-site parking requirements that were very, very difficult to meet when you are restoring and converting a pre-existing building that was not designed with any of those things in mind. And so that experience triggered the adaptive reuse ordinance, which then triggered the 7,500 or so residential conversions that have since taken place, including the buildings that surround the area we're standing in right now.
Okay, perfect. Don't go away. I have one more question. That was really good. Everyone clap. That was really good. Okay, so we're looking back. We're here right now, and I want to look ahead a little bit. Okay, so Don. Oh, now I gotta ask him a question. You gotta ask him later. Okay, so Don. Okay, so we've already seen adaptive reuse revitalize downtown. Now, in the final days of former Mayor Vergosa's office, we had something that was passed where they're rewriting the zoning code. And I have an interview with Tom next week about that. Okay. And building and safety and historic resources, all the building department and engineering are going to be redesigned and put together. Could you tell us, looking as someone who's had their hands in this for almost 30 years, how is the rewriting of the zoning code and the merging of all these building, engineering, and safety and historic resources department, how is this going to help revitalize Broadway?
It's going to help, first, we have a zoning code in Los Angeles that is essentially a suburban zoning code. And the zoning code in Los Angeles really doesn't work very well in urban areas. The first step to deal with that was the adaptive reuse ordinance, and then there have been a couple of overlays since then. So rewriting the zoning ordinance to create zones and create standards in zones that really work with pre-existing buildings and larger scale buildings will be step number one in the zoning ordinance. That is coupled with a piece of work that was already finished, which is a new downtown design guideline that includes street and streetscape standards. One of the first things that did was it stopped the practice that every time a new building was being designed, you had to set the building back to meet a master plan of highways requirement. The setback only applied to that particular parcel, so other parcels continued to have their curbs wherever they previously were, and you had these undulating curbs and small street widenings in different locations. That code said that from that point forward, we will not do additional street widenings except in very rare instances. And all of the space that was supposed to be widened streets will instead become sidewalks. And over time, we will revert those intrusions back out to the curb. That will provide places for ground floor activities such as cafes and so forth to take place a whole lot more easily than they do now. That, by the way, requires changes to the county health code that are going on at the same time as the zoning code. The assembly of all the departments in one place really was demonstrated by the Downtown Design Guide, which brought together Planning Department, Redevelopment Agency, Cultural Affairs Department, Department of Engineering, Bureau of Engineering, Transportation Department, Bureau of Street Services, Sanitation Department, DWP, to look at all of the issues. One of the big problems with much of downtown is the infrastructure is old, but the capacity of it is good. So you can reuse many of these buildings without having to install new capacity in your electric, water, or sewage system. You need to upgrade their quality in some cases because of their age. What that means is you will not be going through and ripping up as much the street system and the sidewalks to install new utilities. Over time, the city has put utility channels in most of the streets so that there are places to go and fairly easily do the upgrades rather than ripping them out. You may have noticed in a couple of places the terrazzo ends before it gets to the curb. That's because of a previous channelization that was done by the city. When the city takes out a non-standard piece of sidewalk, and terrazzo is non-standard, gray concrete in yard-shaped squares is standard. They put back standard, and it's up to a property owner to go back and restore anything that was non-standard. In some cases they will, in most cases they won't. So being able to simplify a number of these standards and eliminate the need for this type of new infrastructure construction will substantially reduce the impact as we go forward. The biggest issue we have to face coming down the pike with the streetcar, though, is that the street bed will have to be strengthened to carry the streetcars. Several years ago, concrete pads were put on both sides of Broadway to accommodate buses. So the hope is that they will reduce the need to do much to change the sidewalk structure. There are a couple of places where, for disability access reason, the curbs will have to be moved and the sidewalks will have to be regraded. We're trying to minimize the amount of that. That's a big issue actually on the block between 3rd and 4th Street.
Perfect. Absolutely, that was fantastic. Okay, so that's our look ahead. We have one last stop. Nathan, you're going to lead the way. I want to cross the street, and I want to be in front of the 1904 Parkinson Rose Hotel.
All right, so
it says Market.
looking
We
at
cross the
Walker
street.
and Eisen.
No, we're going to just cross the street. Get us in front of.
So
Get us in
cross-
front of the Rocket Building.
I'll do it.
Okay, that's where we're going to go. Okay. Okay, I'll talk for a couple of minutes. We'll talk for a couple of minutes. Okay. All right, we're gonna make our last stand here today. Okay, it's really important that everyone come back over here. Can everyone see the tip of the Jesus Saves sign? That's really important. Okay. Jesus Saves, the back? Okay. All right. So we're at 9th and Broadway. We're standing in front of this building at the corner. This is the Rose Hotel by John Parkinson, 1904. Interesting Parkinson structure. It's been remodeled a lot. All right. Okay, the building with this beautiful, this is such a great building. Okay, this building with the fire escape. This is the Broadway Leasehold building. We're going to leave it as a thought exercise to cross the street and admire this Gothic ogive arch structure. It is brick and terracotta. It is 1912, so LA pressed brick would have made the terracotta for this building. This is before Gladdy McBean came to town. This is a gorgeous building. This building was initially, very early on in this building's life, was taken over by the Burns Costume Company, which would become Western Costume, which is the premier costume company for the motion picture industry. Okay, so the Burns Costume Company moved into here around 1915, and then we're going to go across the street. We're looking at the United Artists Blade sign. The building just beyond the United Artists Blade sign, that was built just for the Western Costume Company. It was then known as the Burns Company in 1922. So they got so big that they outgrew this building. They were renting other buildings on the street, and they said, let's just build a building for ourselves. And they moved there. And then by 32, the talkies were here to stay, and there was so much work that they said, we can't really be a costume company in downtown Los Angeles with the entertainment industry being in Hollywood. So they left downtown. But that's, so boom, boom, boom. And then there was a third building they had, and I can't figure out where it is. And so if you ask me, I'm just going to just clear the deck and say I haven't figured that out. But if you look on their website, there's a third building. They don't give it an address, and I have an email after them. I'm waiting. I was hoping to hear back before the tour, but I didn't. So that's costume. Okay. Directly across the street, in back of Nathan, 901. This is the Blackstone Department Store. This is an interesting building. This is John Parkinson, 1912. In 1939, the department store was sold. It became Famous Department Stores, and Styles Clements redesigned the modern facade on the ground floor. 1939, Styles Clements was hired to redesign the ground floor. And you can see very clearly, there's a giant shift between Beaux-Arts, this classic Beaux-Arts Parkinson, and this, Nathan, is it late modern? 39 is just mid-modern. Sure. Right.
Proto-late modern.
Proto-late, thank you. Proto-late modern from a man who's going to write an essay on that. For me, for the landmarking application. Okay, 1939, Famous Department Store. The war comes and goes, and the U.S. Post Office, which was at 7th and Spring, just a block down, which was a 24-hour post office throughout World War II, they move in to the famous department store. So this became the Metropolitan Post Office, and it was there through the 60s, and to everyone's dismay, when it moved there in 1950, they stopped from going from 24 hours to just 7 days a week till 8 p.m. Everyone was crushed. Everyone said the world was ending because the U.S. Post Office couldn't keep a post office running 24 hours a day in downtown Los Angeles. And what was the world coming to? So that's the Metropolitan. I want to take a breath. Ed, would you like to, I want to start to talk about the United Artists. I want to check in with you and how you're feeling and if you want to say something. Okay, great.
I've done enough poetry.
Perfect.
Now we have a rumor that the people I mentioned are not getting divorced, so...
That's horrible.
Just forget it. Yeah, that's better. That's better for them.
Okay, everyone, I want everyone to thank Ed. You've done a great job.
Yeah.
Okay, Don, you did a great job of bringing us to speed on Miracle on Broadway. I'm hoping you can give us one last missing piece to this puzzle, and that is Dr. Gene Scott and the United Artists.
Well, how about the Banksy mural?
What?
There's a Banksy mural on the
You'll show us
side.
that next.
You'll show us that next. Okay.
Sorry.
So
That's okay.
does everyone see the tip of the Jesus Save sign? Okay, go ahead, Don.
The Jesus Save sign was on top of the Church of the Open Door, located on Hope Street just north of 6th. The site of the 550 South Hope Office Building today. That building had for a long time operated as an evangelical church and center of a lot of activities, and was well connected with many of the religious leaders of the city going back many, many years. The building itself was seriously damaged in the earthquake in the mid-1980s, and it was slated for demolition. And at the same time, the city was putting together a program for the renovation and rehabilitation of the Central Library, which largely was going to be financed by allowing large development, large office buildings on pads surrounding the library, and taking unused density from the library site and selling it to the developers of Library Square, the gas company, and the 550 Hope Building. While that negotiation was going on, he came in and bought that building and insisted he was going to put it back into operation, despite the fact that he'd been red tagged by the city, and both the city and the state had clearly indicated the building could not be renovated, could not be saved. After a long period of negotiation, he decided to take over this building with the condition that he'd be allowed to take the sign. We were very happy to let him take the sign to get him off the other building. So he took the sign, he moved it over here. While that was going on, we were also negotiating with another bank to build a headquarters building downtown, and so there was a little bit of competition as who would get the Saves sign up first. He was able to get his up before the other savings bank was able to do theirs. But the sign is still on the building. What its plans are with the Ace Hotel, I haven't heard anything about it.
Murphy said they're going to relight it after
Yeah.
the hotel is
That'd be great.
Okay. Do you just quickly want to talk about Bruce Corwin and you did talk about that? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. Do you want to hold this show for a second? Okay. Donald, thank you. That was fantastic. Okay. So we're here. This is our last stop. We're going to wrap this up. The building. So Donald brought us up to speed on what happened in the late 80s, which is really important. Gene Scott died a few years back. His widow continued the church. His widow sold the church. Ace Hotel purchased the structure, and it is now being renovated by Ace Hotel. If everyone looks at the beautiful tower, which actually houses the elevator and HVAC equipment, that tower has just been cleaned. Isn't that beautiful? Everyone, isn't that gorgeous? They just pressure washed that.
That's the one that's supposed to be the rest of the Giralda.
It is, yes, it is a copy of Giralda in Spain. Yeah. Okay.
Before they washed it, it was black.
It was okay. So if you look at the building, it's terracotta. If you look at everything but the tower, that's what the building. I mean, everything but the tower hasn't been touched. So the tower has been cleaned, and that's the way it looked when it was built in 1927. So let's hold on a second. So this structure, the building was built in 1927. Walker and Eisen were the architects. They have a whole Walker and Eisen walking tour. They're utter geniuses. It's terracotta. Howard Crane is the architect for the theater. We can't get into the theater yet, but we will next year. and then we'll talk about Howard Crane. Howard Crane designed theaters in Detroit and Chicago, very important theater architect. What's interesting to note about all these theaters, the buildings that house the theaters, if you could fly overhead, you would see that in the late 20s, the engineering didn't exist to have office space over the theaters. So all these buildings are giant, it's perimeter. The theater doesn't have anything over it. So the back of this building is just a giant hollow because they couldn't actually span the theaters to put office space. It was prohibitively expensive. So that's interesting. All right. So 1927, United Artists was of course sort of a renegade distribution motion picture company. Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith. They were making the films they wanted to make. It's a whole other story. It's Alfred Heisenberg was the muralist on the interior, and gosh, I can't wait for them to reopen so we can go in. All the murals, they're gorgeous murals in the theater, and all the Fairbanks, Pickford, Chaplin, they're all depicted in these beautiful murals. Kim and I went to services while Gene Scott's widow was still. We're very excited.
Oh, go on, say it.
What?
How hard it was to look at the building while she was there.
I thought you were going to get tackled, Karen. What? I told you not to do that. I told you not to do it, and you did it, and these two gorillas, I thought they were going to attack you.
We sat through the whole service. I listened to her. It was very complicated. And then at the end, I thought I would...
She doesn't know Hebrew. She doesn't know Greek. And all she did was talk about Greek and Hebrew etymology. And she doesn't know how to write Hebrew either, but that's okay.
Yeah, Richard kept poking me and saying, that's not right, that's not right. And then I thought, okay, we sat very respectfully, and now I'm going to walk down the aisle and I'm going to look up at this beautiful ceiling. No, apparently I was going to assassinate the lady preacher, so I was asked to hurry along. So I can't wait till it opens. There's a lot to see.
It's a gorgeous structure. The most important thing about this building, which is probably not in the forefront of your mind unless you've studied it, is that it was not only built as a theater, but it was built for the California Petroleum.
And they could not have actually financed it without the California Petroleum 30-year lease.
Okay, so this building is important because Walker and Eisen were geniuses, and they figured out to bring an oil company in for the financing and United Artists in as a movie theater, and this building exemplifies the two major industries of Los Angeles in the late 20s, oil and the motion picture industry. So, its name today is sometimes the Texaco building. Texaco took over. That's another story, and you can't talk about that because we have to wrap this up. But that's another story. Here it is. Ace Hotel is taking it over. I don't even want to get into what they're doing with the theater because they say they're preserving it, and I believe that. I don't know. Michelle says, yep, I believe you. Our people have been in great. I'm in touch with Yael. Yael is now my point. Okay. LA Historic Theater Foundation is confident. Good. I'm confident too. We have a contact person there, Yael. She's eager to get us in. So as soon as they're open, we're going to schedule a tour and we'll go. It'll be great. Ace Hotel. So the fact that there's the Rialto is going to open up an Urban Outfitters, this is a real anchor. So this is real. So Donald, Miracle on Broadway was 1987. It's now it's almost 2014. So all that time it's been all those decades. We're now finally getting some major retail on Broadway, and I think in 5 years this is going to be unrecognizable. Yeah. And I hope for the better. I believe it will be. I believe it will be. I believe it will be. I'm going to wrap up the tour. I'm going to encourage you to cross the street and look at the Broadway leasehold building. This is an absolutely gorgeous structure, and it's a great example of terracotta from LA Press Brick, which is a really important manufacturer. They did those of you that were on my birthday bus last year, they're the ones that did the San Bernardino train station, the tile of the San Bernardino train station, which is a gorgeous structure. Nathan, do you have anything to add? Yes, this is. That's right. I thought that the Sparkle Factory was opening at the old Western Costume, but no. It is the Broadway leasehold building, which is going to open as the Sparkle Factory, which of course was motivated by the decision of Ace. So yes, this is going to be jewelry factory and retail. Right. So
Let Ed show us the Banksy first.
Ed, I want you to show us the Banksy girl.
You know, there's a huge development coming in on this block, and this building here, which is Tarina Tarantino's new building, needed breathing space, and the way they got it, they were able to get 15 feet because of a Banksy mural on the side of the building.
Banksy, really?
That's how important.
I didn't realize it was
Here it is. See it right here? And that's what's protecting the building.
Isn't that funny? I didn't. Somebody else. I would love that.
No, we have to do 15. Doesn't sound like a lot. You know, this is going to be a huge development, this whole block and the next block. Jeff Palmer.
Are you going to make it look good? It's going to look exactly like the Visconti, the Orsini, the Piero. He only hired one architect once. Figured, well, if I just hired one architect once. Oh, hell no.
And across from this.
Ed has a poem.
Well, here's my tribute to the United Artists Building. It's really about the Motion Picture TV Fund. You know, I just want to make you aware that that fund still exists. And they're the heirs of Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin. And they still maintain a fund from the original endowment to take care of anyone who works in the film business. This is so romantic. To a Flaneur's heart, artists are akin to God. And here were three who fought to save all actors from history. And workers too, as their descendants do until this day, paying all in the industry who ever worked in film. I left out the self-reflective aspects of my poem about being a flaneur.
That's me,
on
baby.
Broadway. Is that, you know, a flaneur is a lazy person that spends time at cafe shops all day.
Yep. And my name's Flannery, so.
Are you a broker also?
Yeah, it's from Public Enemy. From Public Enemy in 1932, starring Jimmy Cagney and Gene Harlow, to Public Enemy 2012, baby.
Donald, I want you just to give us. We're done. We're done. But Donald, we've been talking about old buildings being revamped, but really, looking ahead, there's really very little left. The future of Broadway is not adaptive reuse of historic structures. The future of Broadway is new development. Ed, you just mentioned that Jeff Palmer has a big development coming on this block. Donald, do you just want to point people to what we can expect for new development? Not what we can expect, but really there aren't many historic structures left besides the Hamburgers.
The vast majority of the historic structures have now been spoken for. They've been acquired by people who are doing rehabilitation, who are doing conversions. So, for the most part, the historic structures are preserved. What remains now are a couple of cases where there were non-historic structures that were built on sites that were previously demolished, or vacant sites like the parking lots that exist on this block. So there are a couple of places where new infill will come along. The city, as part of the rezoning effort, is expected to come up with design guidelines so there will be compatibility of the new structures with the buildings that surround them, at least in terms of scale and some elements of design. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the more important things to be looking at, though, is to make sure that the public improvements are done in ways that don't destroy or seriously damage historic fabric that you have at the grade level, including the sidewalks, and in some cases, portions of the ground floors of some of the buildings that could be affected when areas of the sidewalk have to be repaired or replaced.
Perfect. You did it. Donald, thank you. Everyone thank Donald. Very insightful guy. Okay, we're done. We did it. I want to thank you. We're going to do this again next month, and ask me questions, hashtag Broadway on my mind. Next month, I believe next month, we're going to go up to 3rd Broadway, and we're going to talk about the old circus.
Oh, you're putting me to work.
Over, yeah, that took over what's now the Wedding Chapel.
Sure.
The old Boston dry goods store. There's the old, you know, you're excited, yeah. We're going to go up there. We're going to talk about the old Boston dry goods store and the carnival and Ira Yellen and thank you all.
Panama Pacific International Exposition came down here, yeah.
God bless. Ask me questions. Oh, thank you. Woo. Thank you. Very good. Thank you.